racketeering, bribery, and sexual exploitation of a child. These charges all stemmed from a decades-long sex trafficking operation that was run by the singer, where he preyed on women and underage girls and boys and manipulated them with money and sex. The tragedy of this situation, though, is that it wasn't actually a secret. There were always signs that R. Kelly was a predator. It's like everybody knew, and nobody seemed to be able to do anything about it. There was the covert marriage to singer Aaliyah when she was only 15 years old, the 2002 sex tape that allegedly showed R. Kelly having sex with a minor, and then there was that Touré interview he did, y'all remember this, where he didn't even deny that he had an attraction to teenagers. Accusers like Tiffany Hawkins spoke out 25 years ago, and her accusations fell on deaf ears over at the Illinois State's Attorney's Office, where they weren't even interested in prosecuting or bringing charges back then. For decades, journalist Jim DeRogatis wrote about R. Kelly's abuse and his victims, and nobody really seemed to care as he was publishing article after article, until finally, in 2019, Hampton's Lifetime documentary series, Surviving R. Kelly, sent shockwaves through the culture and finally broke through. The documentary was the tipping point, shifted the conversation around R. Kelly and the consequences that he should face. And most importantly, it finally sparked real, widespread empathy for his victims and the turmoil that they faced. Why didn't anybody care enough to see about these women all those years, to feel for them, to demand justice for them? Joining me now to discuss the verdict and the role that her documentary played in getting justice for these victims is Hampton. I am so honored and excited to have you here, Dream. Thank you so much for joining Amplified.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You know, so many of us out here just really believe and know in our hearts that we would not be here today if it wasn't without you and without your work. So I'm just curious, as someone who has been knee deep in thinking about this for decades and then certainly putting together the documentary, just like, what was your reaction yesterday, finally seeing the verdict, finally seeing consequences for his actions? Like, how are you feeling?
My first thought went, of course, to the survivors. You know, I was surprised. I can't say that I expected any of this. You know, R. Kelly was a 50-year-old R&B singer who hadn't had a hit in 10 years when we did Surviving R. Kelly. And his predation, like you said, had been an open secret for almost 3 decades. So I certainly I can't say that we expected, and there was a team of us. It wasn't just me making this docuseries. We didn't go into this saying that there are going to be charges filed a month after this airs, or that even it'll find like some huge audience. You know, I knew that there was an audience that I wanted to engage, and that was his. And he's a genre singer, an R&B artist whose audience and has the love and currency of Black people and has had that for a long time. So I was surprised and shocked on every level. But I thought about the survivors immediately. I thought about Joy Savage, if you want to be honest. I thought about, you know, the remaining victim who's still, you know, her family describes her as brainwashed.
Yeah. Like, and I wonder, you know, I think about all these survivors too, and I really just want to make sure that we focus our conversations on them because they were the voices and the people that were so unseen. I wonder, have you, in the wake of all this, have had any opportunity to be in touch or to just hear from them and their reactions as all of this is coming down?
No, in terms of the documentary, the role that executive producer Tamara Simmons always played was to be that person who was the connection to the survivors, to bring them on board. I personally brought Sparkle on board, but this was a project that I was invited onto. And a big part of my role in making this documentary, besides interviewing and sitting with every single survivor for hours under very hot lights, asking them to reopen trauma and pain, was to make sure that this was a project that could withstand any litigation. So do you know what what that looks like and feels like when you are an interviewer who has to ask follow-up questions that a detective might ask? You have to say things like, "Oh, this happened. Did you tell anyone at the time? Who is that person? May I have their contact?" Like, we had to produce a transcript for this show that could be read in open court and could stand up to that kind of scrutiny. So in that moment, as producer, a showrunner, I wasn't able to be a survivor myself. I wasn't able to be like a sister or a friend. I had to produce something that would make it to air and that we wouldn't get sued over. And despite allegate or threats from his camp, and accusations that we had lied and that there were falsehoods in this docu-series, we never got sued. And furthermore, everything that was in our docu-series ended up being repeated in open court under oath over the past 5 weeks. So that was the kind of rigor that we had to bring to the docu-series. Yeah.
Wow, I can't even imagine the pressure. Now, you have been a journalist for years and years and years, and obviously having the journalistic rigor to tell the truth all the time, to profile people, etc. But the care that you had to take, knowing kind of over your shoulder that either you could be sued for libel, right? The whole production could be in a precarious situation. But then the idea that your transcripts might at some point be a part of the litigation, be used by prosecutors. The pressure of that, like, how do you, as a creative, because I want to honor you as someone who certainly is a creative storyteller first and foremost, right? How do you reconcile that as a creative person trying to like look over your shoulder and now parse words in that way? Like, what is that process even like?
I mean, it's difficult. I don't want to complain. It's a job, and it's a really great job, and often there is creative freedom in filmmaking. This wasn't that, though. This wasn't, I've been thinking a lot about this, actually. I've been thinking about documentaries or this process as a possible site of healing, and it really isn't. Again, this is us asking them to relive and reopen their trauma, and then they have to begin to do the work of healing. Before we came on air, I sent you a piece that just went live on in the Washington Post that I wrote about what might justice look like beyond this verdict, what might healing look like for them. And I've really been thinking about some of the things that I wish we'd had on the set. I wish we'd had therapists. Some of the survivors complained about that afterwards. It was something that I've asked for. But again, a production company is more concerned with having a lawyer there that's making sure I'm not answering leading questions than they are, say, the care of a survivor. That doesn't mean that Murray or Lifetime were cold. It just means that this is a corporate company that's publicly traded, and we're asking them to come, we're asking them to tell this story in this intimate and public way, both intimate and public, which is, an oxymoron. And then they have to then there has to be the work of the healing. And I was thinking about what can be done in terms of funds, in terms of resources, in terms of restitution, quite frankly. I've been thinking about the reports about R. Kelly having a negative, bank balance. And I was thinking about the money that he spent, the resources that he spent running this criminal operation. And by that, I mean that he had assistants, he had a staff that helped him these crimes. That bought tickets, that decided, that knew who was going to be eating that night and who wasn't. I don't know. I've just been thinking a lot about what the victims are owed, by us, this creative team that brought this to light, by R. Kelly, and by the larger public, and money isn't a small part of it. Therapy is expensive and they need years of it.
It's expensive, and the way you're describing this, I'm realizing that in some ways these people are reliving their trauma. They're going through therapy in the public eye, right? It's a little bit, I think, voyeuristic of us, as you talk through this, to have been able to bear witness. Thank God for their courage, right, on behalf of themselves, is frankly the opportunity for your platform for them to use as an advocacy space for themselves to even kind of get to this point. But thank you for raising that, and in that Washington Post piece that you wrote and published today, talking so much about the need to protect the survivors and what is the debt that we owe them, because you're right, you made that point that there's so much focus on punishing the abuser that we often forget that it's the victims that don't have the resources that they need to truly heal around all of this. And as we figure out what happens next, there certainly are some victory laps going down right now, like, oh yeah, the sentencing, and like, finally, right? Yeah. But there's all these people's lives who have been just completely torn apart, that now they've got to figure out how to put them back together. And just what can we do as people out in the community who are watching and ultimately kind of cheering them on? Do you have some words?
Peace community, peace community. You already know, if you're new to the community, welcome. If you're a part of the community, welcome back. Listen, surviving R. Kelly executive producer Dream Hampton chimes in and gives her feeling about the whole situation, the verdict, and does she feel that her docuseries was the whole culmination of him being brought on these charges? She said she felt that she didn't feel that it would be as big of a project, but she knew that it would be big. She knew that he had a fan base. She knew that certain people, the victims, she felt, a need and obligation to do it and to fulfill it and do it in the right way. So she was, fine, tap dancing around a lot of lines, because she had to produce this film with all of the producers and everybody else, the higher ups on her back, to produce a film. And she even said that she felt that she would want to have, like, therapists and different people like that on set. But she even says that, the big, producers of the show, or whatever the case may be, of the docuseries, was more concerned with having a lawyer present, so that, she wasn't saying certain things, or, being able to be sued in different ways, or whatever the case may be. She said there was countless threats from R. Kelly's camp that they would sue her, they would sue them, but it never panned out. She said they were never sued. So we did hear that. She did say the people is who rallied behind the whole situation, and is who really got the wheels rolling on this thing. We all know, if some people are, caping for the situation, or some people have, a relation to maybe R. Kelly, or maybe the music, or maybe he's an iconic figure, or whatever you feel. Even if you feel that he was not guilty now of something right now, you have to say that he was guilty of Aaliyah. Aaliyah was a baby. Regardless of the fact if she was a strong woman, she grew up to be a strong woman, and all of those things, we have to also take that into consideration, because the court also took that into consideration. She was the first person that they were talking about. So we also discovered that there still is one remaining victim, and our hearts go out to that victim. The victim, they say that the family of the victim says that she's brainwashed, and she's probably siding and probably really hurting and killing herself over this. Not to say literally, but when something's killing you, what I'm saying, because she sides with R. Kelly. Sometimes we do that as victims. You develop Stockholm syndrome as an abuse victim. Sometimes you side with your abuser. So we do know that to be a psychological fact. Yeah, man, it's a lot. It's a lot. Most definitely, it's a lot. Shout out to Dream Hampton for producing a great docu series. I think her and her team basically single handedly got the ball rolling on this situation, and you know, got justice at least for Aaliyah. Some people are mad at everything else, the racketeering charges and the sex trafficking and the way that, the federal government put the case together and how they charged it like a RICO case, kind of. Some people are mad at that. He was also charged the same way Dr. York, if you know who Dr. York is, he was a leader of the Nuwapians nation, which was a way of life. And they had the land. They had like a compound in Georgia, but he started out, in multiple places when you do the background on him. But then he was charged with sexually assaulting all of the followers' children, you know. So, and that is the same ilk, the same cloth that Brother Polite comes from. Brother Polite comes from Dr. York. He praised Dr. York as if he was a god, like a god. He said that he's my God. He praised Dr. York like a god. So we can understand the psyche when we think about little things like that. Not to get too far from the situation, but when we're dealing with certain situations and cases like this, because Brother Polite is charged now, so everybody in the light is waiting to see what this case is going to be about and what is going to be the culmination of the whole entire case. Make sure that y'all leaving y'all comments. This videos are for y'all comments. You already know the vibe. Drop y'all likes, shares, and all that. I appreciate that. Make sure y'all subscribing to the channel. Make sure y'all subscribing to the backup as well. One Community, TWO, One Community 2. I need to get all of my people over there so that I could go about building the next one, because once we vibrate on a high consciousness, they're going to try to bring us down, but we'll always be in another platform. So by the time, if they ever do, we can always get back up and running, and we have to plan for the future. We have to have plan A through Z, not just plan A and B. You already know the vibe. That's how we got to do this. I appreciate y'all. I appreciate everybody supporting the community, everybody sharing a love, sharing a like, sharing a comments, everybody sharing $1, donating to the community. Every dollar is going towards good causes, most definitely going back towards all good causes. And we're going to be doing some great things here in the community. So I appreciate everybody. You already know our mantra: one love, one voice,